has been to Camden and Rockland, Maine can notice the subtle differences between the two towns. We set off to answer the question, why and where did Camden and Rockland develop so differently? And first of all, here's a brief overview of both towns.
Camden is a rare place where the mountains meet the sea. English settlers were here as early as 1768, when it was named after a Lord Camden. Camden was a center for shipbuilding, both during the Revolutionary War and before. It was the center for the war in the Penobscot area, where many men left home to serve and many ships were built. Many statues are located around town, dedicated to Civil War men as well as Spanish-American War men. In addition, Camden was a mill town for around 200 years. Dams on the Maguntacook were built which produced enough power to woolen mills. As time went on and the beauty of the small town became more recognizable, there was less industry and there was more tourist business.
Rockland is a hidden gem. It is a town rich in history and shining bright for the future. It was originally known as Lerman's Cove, then East Thomaston, and finally Rockland in 1850 and chartered as a city in 1854. Its tickets to success were its shipbuilding and lime industry. It was home to many other booming businesses, including railways, foundries, lumber mills, grain mills, etc., but all were surpassed by the lime industry. Once lime was in less demand, it shifted to a service center city and gained in industry and tourism.
Now that we have a further understanding of the history of both towns, we enlisted the help of some local historians to get their take on why and where did Camden and Rockland develop so differently.
My name is Ann Morris, and I'm the curator for the Rockland Historical Society. I've been here almost 10 years. The history goes all the way back to the American Revolution and to the War of 1812, and the Civil War is an important part of the history here. But the history here is based on shipping and shipbuilding and the lime industry and the granite industry and farming and fishing.
I'm Sandy Delano. I'm a local historian. During the Civil War, you had mills here making wool for Civil War uniforms. So they had some industry by that time. What does Camden have that Rockland didn't have? Nice river that allowed you to, there were almost 20 mill locations on the Maguntacook River early on. They had everything from woolen mills to powder mills, and when I say powder, that's gunpowder. Sawmills, grist mills for grinding grain.
Well, anyway, Rockland doesn't have any rivers, and so the things that developed here in Rockland were the lime industry. We had the greatest lime, the purest and the biggest quantity of lime around here. We had 136 lime kilns along the harbor, burning lime night and day, making smoke and dust in the air.
Everybody and their grandmother down there was burning lime rock, quarrying it, burning it, shipping it all over the world. If you see Rockland, what do you see? A great big harbor. You try and find that big harbor in Camden. You won't.
Camden developed a little bit earlier than Rockland because Camden has a very protected, safe harbor.
Rockland, on the other hand, was what was originally called East Thomaston, and it had a big harbor, but it was not settled really until 1800-ish, and Camden was settled in 1768. We did have shipbuilding, but we lacked a whole lot of waterfront here, so we were somewhat restricted in space to actually build things. The size of the harbor was the number one drawback, but the geography, I said, the river was a moneymaker. You had, as I said, various types of mills, but you were restricted in terms of where your product went. A lot of it just stayed here, as opposed to Rockland, which was shipping all over the world. They really get into shipbuilding.
The Rockland Harbor is wide and open. It's deep, but it's wide and open, and nor'easters could come in, and if there were ships in the harbor, they would wash them up on the shore and damage the streets and the buildings. We did not get the breakwater built in Rockland until I think it started in 1880. So there was the safety issue of the harbor. People would sail into Rockland Harbor with anything from the West Indies, like sugar and coffee and tea from China, and West India goods also included spices and fruit. And so they'd sail into the harbor and they could sell all this stuff to the settlers that were settled sort of along Old County Road. And so they thought business is great here, so they'd build a wharf and a building, and then they'd be shipping fish or lumber or eventually the lime industry took off. It was shipped all over the East Coast, and that was an inexpensive way to transport something as heavy as lime. Then the granite companies, granite was out on the islands and also in Stonington, but we didn't have any granite quarries in Rockland, but the granite companies had their offices in Rockland, and they would take orders, and the granite would be harvested or quarried on the islands, and then they'd ship it over to Rockland and then ship it away.
Anyway, that became a very industrialized town very rapidly, but it was 20 or 30 years after, probably 40 years after Camden. And Camden was, let me see, what did we ship? We shipped ice off Lily Pond, allegedly the clearest ice in the world. But the Kennebec guys said the same thing, and the Androscoggin guys said the same thing. So I don't, it's good marketing. Anyway, in 1960, Rockland had a main street, and Camden had a main street. They're now, and a few tourists would pop in. You could go downtown Rockland and buy a suit, and some dress shoes and what have you. And eventually, it kind of all trickled out to the local shopping malls. Same things happened with Camden, leaving these wonderful old buildings for the tourist trade. And that's what you got there, both heavily focused on tourists.
So there you have it. Turns out these two towns aren't that different after all. Both ended up as tourist centers after being involved in their respective industries, lime in Rockland and milling in Camden. These differences can be credited to Rockland's large harbor and Camden's river. Gradually they merged into the similar tourist towns they are today.